Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you here today for an amazing panel. I'd love to start off by having everyone come off of mute and welcome yourself in the space at the same time. If so, I'd love to hear everyone's voice and just start off with this such positive, high energy. So feel free to take yourself off of mute and say hello to the square next to you.
Hi everyone, Sarah here.
Hi everyone.
All those great voices.
Saludos a todos.
I'm very excited. A big welcome to everyone who is here joining us today for Women in Cleantech and Sustainability virtual panel, Addressing the Burden of Air Pollution. I am Kirpa Graywall, a board member here at WCS and on the business development team at Sustainable Brands. I will be the moderator for today's event. I am thrilled to welcome a panel of air quality specialists illuminating how pollution is inequitably distributed towards marginalized communities and strategizing how to address this injustice. Air pollution is a sounding alarm for immediate climate action. For this panel, WCS focuses on the San Joaquin Valley as a case study of impacts of air pollution on a local community. This region is the biggest produce grower in the US and has been referred to as the place with the worst air pollution in America. The underserved populations face hardship related to access to clean water and negative consequences in the deterioration of health due to air pollution. Next slide, please. I'd love to go over the agenda quickly. We have a few minutes just to do introductions, go over Zoom etiquette, housekeeping. I'll be introducing the panelists. We'll be going into a lively panel discussion and then regroup for Q&A. I want to remind you, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to drop them in the chat. One of our amazing producers will capture them and we will go over them towards the end of the event. Also, feel free to drop in your contact information in the chat. This is all about networking, and it's always nice to make some new friends who have common interests. So I welcome you to join me as we share our information and can connect with each other further. Next slide, please. Women in Cleantech and Sustainability celebrated their 10 years last year. What a decade of change. Well, as you might know or you might not know, Women in Cleantech foster an influential network of professionals to further the role of women in growing the green economy and making a positive impact on the environment. If you're interested in volunteering with WCS, feel free to reach out to me, the WCS volunteer manager. We have monthly events, mostly virtual right now, trending back to in-person hopefully soon, an annual membership program, and WCS TED Style Talks conference. Next slide, please. Some of the upcoming events that we have are February 24th, Averting a Solar and Storage Waste Crisis. March 10th, an environmental documentary. Very excited for that one. March 24th, A Woman's Guide to Raising Capital in 2022. Next slide, please. Some Zoom etiquette. Since we might have more knowledge about this, I'll keep this short. Remember to unmute yourself and mute appropriately. Share your video if you can. And please write down your full name so we know who is speaking and who to contact if you're dropping some questions in the chat. Please remember to be respectful of each other and take away some insights and leave judgment behind. This is all about having fun, connecting with one another and networking. I hope you learned something impactful today. Next slide. Join our virtual membership. We have a lot to offer, and we'll probably be showing this slide towards the end as well. Feel free to take a photo of the QR code to learn more. Next slide, please. Well, as I mentioned, I'm Kirpa Graywall, and it's such a pleasure to be your moderator for today's event. We have a great group of panelists that I would love to discuss and tell you more about. Next slide, please. WCS brings together the perspectives of Keyshawn White, a youth leader in air pollution, Jessica Olson, Director of Community Strategy and Resources with San Joaquin Valley Air Quality District, and Dr. Lupita Montoya, Air Quality Advocate with the Environmental Health Coalition. We will discuss how to address air pollution and its inequitable effects on marginalized communities. I would love to start off by introducing our panelists. Keyshawn White, born on the southwest side of Fresno, California, involved with Fresno Boys and Men of Color program, where he learned how to advocate for his community. While in high school, he applied for the Pollination Project Impact Grant and used the funds to purchase a drone and a purple air quality monitor, and started to test the air at school districts around Fresno. He conducted his experiments and collected data, the disparity in air quality between the northern part of Fresno, historically white community, and the southwest side of Fresno, historically people of color community, became clear. He received a $10,000 grant from the Youth Leadership Institute to expand his project and partnered with the Fresno Unified School District to put air quality monitors up in every high school in the district. They also built an app so that people can get up to the minute hyper-local air quality information. Thank you for joining us today, Keyshawn.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, such a pleasure. Jessica Olson has been with the Valley Air District for a total of 6 years. In 2018, Jessica spent 1 year at Elgin Air Force Base as an Air Force research lab contractor before returning to the district as the program manager overseeing air quality modeling, monitoring, research, and analysis. In her current role as the district's first Director of Community Strategies and Resources, Jessica oversees the district's implementation of the Community Air Protection Program under California Assembly Bill 617, as well as other community-based clean air efforts. Thank you for joining us today, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
And lastly, Dr. Lupita Montoya is an expert in indoor air quality and aerosol science. She is a recovering academic and recently joined the Environmental Health Coalition as their air quality advocate. Dr. Montoya is a first-generation Latinx scholar who conducts multidisciplinary research that addresses, among other things, environmental and health impacts of indoor air pollution, especially in low-income communities in the US and abroad. She is also an ardent advocate for environmental and social justice. Some of the hats she's currently wearing are Chair, Representation and Equity Affairs Committee for the American Association of Aerosol Research, Co-Chair, Community Engaged Research Task Force, Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors, and Co-Chair, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, Tau Beta Phi Engineering. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Lupita Montoya.
Thank you for having me here.
Now that we've introduced our panelists, let us dive into our discussion. Please remember to put your questions in the chat and we will address them during our Q&A time. The first question I'd like to ask our lovely panelist here is, how did you get here? What is your story? I'd love to have a quick introduction. Let's keep this short because I have a lovely list of other questions. Who would like to start?
I can start. To keep it short, it was just pretty much the passion and the drive just to figure out what was going on in my community. And when I figured that out, it's just to pretty much educate my community to fight for themselves.
Thank you for sharing that. Jessica, can I hear you chime in?
Absolutely. So just by way of background, I have a background in biomedical engineering. And when I moved to Fresno and was sort of looking to find jobs, I really found that working at the Air District kind of offered me an opportunity to have sort of a hand really every day in a decision that's made at this agency to impact public health. And once Assembly Bill AB 617 got started several years ago, as I'll talk certainly, I'm sure, more in some of our discussion, it really offered even more opportunity to have a more direct impact on the most overburdened communities. So I really look forward to talking more with you about it, but that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
We're really excited to have you, all of you panelists. And Dr. Lupita, can I hear a little bit about your background? Would love for you to answer the question of, how did you get here and what's your story? Just a quick intro, and then we can.
It's a long story, so I'm gonna make it short. And you used the right term. I'm a recovering academic. After spending decades in the academic world, I recently moved to the nonprofit sector to enable progress in environmental and social justice that I found impossible to make in academia. I have a BS, MS, and PhD in engineering with 5 years of postdoctoral training in public health. So that's my tools. I have been tackling the problem of environmental injustice as an engineering problem. That's what I'm doing now. And I'm a first generation person. So, I'm looking at it with many different eyes, and I'm full in to fix this problem.
We're so happy to have such a diverse group of panelists here, and each one of your insights is really going to shed light on this issue. So I'd love to start off with the second question, and anyone can sort of chime in. Just let me know who'd love to go first. What are some factors preventing communities from having good air quality?
Maybe I can start kind of from our perspective. So at
Perfect.
the Valley Air District, just by way of background, we cover the whole sort of southern part of the Central Valley, like geographically, although we consider ourselves the whole Central Valley. And that is up in Stockton, so San Joaquin County, all the way through Kern County, so down in the Bakersfield area. So traditionally, we are set up to tackle regional air pollution. And so primarily, we have an air pollution issue kind of regardless of community, but I'm sure folks on the call can talk about kind of the impacts of air pollution, maybe on folks, even if you're equally breathing the same air, the impacts might be different in different communities. But certainly, of course, not only do we have regional air pollution, but we are also tasked with taking a look at community air pollution. So maybe on top of what they're experiencing, that might be true for like a lot of the valley, there are also communities that are maybe being impacted by local sources of pollution. And so we are tasked at the district with understanding, kind of to your question, why people are being impacted more so. Maybe it's the way that their homes are set up. I know Dr. Montoya has a lot of interest in understanding maybe indoor air pollution, but also are they nearby? Most likely, right? Some of these sources may be heavy duty truck traffic on freeways or industrial sources based on maybe where communities are living. And so that's certainly just a high level perspective from the district as to sort of why certain communities are impacted maybe more than others.
Thank you so much for that perspective. I really appreciate you giving us a little bit of a brief. I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Lupita, and then afterwards, Keyshawn.
Yes, well, poor communities, which are often people of color, are limited by many factors, obviously, social, environmental, and so forth, economic, certainly, including upward and physical mobility. So they cannot escape pollution. And so they often live and work in environments that are polluted. For example, these people often live near freeways and ports that generate high levels of pollutants, both in the air and the soil, the water. They work in industries that are highly polluting, and they often are limited or have no protections. They have limited or no protections against air pollution and other types of pollution in their workplaces. So those are different topics I have covered with my research. So there's many different factors, but one of them is, oftentimes they have no choice.
Very true. Keyshawn, would you like to chime in on that question of what are some factors preventing communities from having good air quality?
Yeah, just to piggyback off Dr. Lupita, there's many factors, but one of the factors is also the proximity of these high level pollution sites to actual residents and schools and parks and places of the such. So it's not even a fact of having pollution in our city. Is just why is it so close to these schools? So when I was first starting my research, and I went to Malaga Elementary School, and there was actually a train like literally across the street, and luckily it was on the weekend, so there was no kids after school. But when I was doing my test, the air quality around that area I already knew was going to be somewhat in yellow. But when the train went past, it sparked up all the way to like the deep purple. And just in the sense of that, thinking that the kids, and I know the trains run like 24 hours, they really don't stop. So knowing that when the kids are at school and these pollution are getting pushed up, it's like kind of forcing the kids to breathe in this air. So it's not really even giving them a choice.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective from, bringing in your background and your experience within San Joaquin Valley Air District. Like, it is so nice to see these three leaders, I'd like to say, in different levels of life being here for this panelist discussion. Your perspective is just so valuable, and I look forward to digging in a little bit deeper. I'd like to ask next why it's so hard for some communities to have good air quality. I know we touched upon it a little bit in the last question, but was curious if you could give a little bit more insight and expand upon that.
And maybe I can just add to a little bit. So just in general, I mean, certainly a lot of the proximity was certainly spoken to. I think there's historical land use practices that that are kind of coming to light now, that in the community work that we do, that maybe were historically line communities where people of color and low income were forced to be, near the freeways. And in this particular case, and where Keyshawn does a lot of his work, it's like there's an intersection of several freeways in Southwest Fresno that are impacting and can impact those communities of color. And then on top of it, as I mentioned, regional air pollution, just to talk about like the challenges of, pollution needs space in order to not impact folks. And we live in literally a bowl. Our valley is surrounded almost 360 practically, certainly on three sides by mountain ranges, and then the predominant wind direction blows pollution from the north end, or even maybe more populated areas north of the valley into the valley. And we have this meteorology that puts a lid on all of it. So we're already challenged just like on a baseline level. And so the challenge not only is regional and community level, but then also how do we work to communicate to folks the need to protect themselves? Because right now, we see into the future, yes, there is a goal and there's a line in sight to reduce the pollution. But until then, what are we going to tell people? Oh, sorry, until 10 years from now, you're going to have No, we need to get them healthy now. We need to tell them how to take action to protect themselves. So that's the challenge, but definitely the opportunity too.
Completely agreed with you. I just wanted to touch upon something that you had said, just so you could just explain redlining a little bit more to our audience. I know this group might know, but would just love for you to just define it for us.
I'll speak from just my perspective. I'm certainly no land use expert, but just traditionally in certain communities, there were maps that lenders would use that would sort of define where they would identify certain population types. And it would be sometimes subtle, but sometimes less subtle about specifically identifying groups of people that lenders should not lend to build or buy homes in certain areas of a particular community. So in the case in Fresno, northern parts, as was sort of part of Keyshawn's introduction or bio that Kirpa read out, northern parts were primarily those areas where folks of certain populations weren't or it was suggested that they should not be able to buy homes in northern parts of Fresno, where there is, if you look at it, fewer freeways, fewer industrial sources. Southern parts of Fresno, sure, yeah, lend to people of color. Well, it turns out that as generations move forward, that's kind of where they were stuck in living. And so it's not necessarily a factor of what those folks are doing now, but it's a factor of what their parents and their grandparents were allowed to live and not build that generational wealth and live in those healthy communities.
Thank you, Jessica, for that. Appreciate your insight on this question. Would love to hear from both you, Dr. Lupita and Keyshawn, just a little bit more about your experience of, the hardships for communities to have good air quality. I know that you've done lots of research about this, Dr. Lupita, and yourself, Keyshawn. So whoever would like to go first.
I want to just piggyback a little bit on what Jessica mentioned, because when she described the situation in the Valley, she described the situation in LA that compelled me to go to graduate school. And back in the 80s, when I thought I was going to design clean cars, and that's the reason why I went to graduate school, to ameliorate the problem in LA, I embarked on that direction and I ended up studying slightly different things, but still connected to air pollution. So the situation regarding, geographical limitations is one problem. So therefore, the problem is always going to be there. And if there was a problem back in the 80s when I was Keyshawn's age, it is still a problem. So we're done waiting. We gotta move to the action now. And so I'm here to tell you, I've been at this for decades. So no more waiting. That's it. Time's up. Like Oprah said, time's up. And so I think it's time for us to get into the action part. Regarding communities of color, yes, there's many reasons why we, and I say we because I'm a person of color, I'm a woman of color, and even with my Harvard and my Stanford degree, my education, people of certain kind, to use Jessica's terminology, look at me the same way they will look somebody who have no education. They just think of me in the same way before I got my education. And so they treat me such ways and expect me to be blind to all of these inequities that I'm aware of, that I have learned about. And then therefore it is to me important to not let that kind of behavior continue. So some of us are beyond that dark space, we're out of that space, and we're not gonna go back into that space. So I'm glad that Jessica brought it up, because it really is a deliberate exclusion of people, not just economically, but even educationally. They don't want the enlightened ones to speak up, and they don't want for us to be more enlightened people from our communities, you know, and uplift them. So that's for me, that's where I am now. There's many people who need to be uplifted, and we need to be speaking about all these problems with honesty.
Absolutely. I love your passion. I'm so happy about the work that you've done in this space, and you constantly seem to surprise me with all the publications that I've been reading. So thank you for just dedicating yourself to this big issue, and I hope you the best. Keyshawn, I'd love to hear you chime in on this, because I know from our talks that you have lots to say about this.
Yeah, so just pretty much to sum it up, the main reason why it's going to be hard for us, I can say, is not we can't overcome this environmental injustice in Black and Brown communities. I just feel like we have to call it what it is, and it's environmental racism, and it's been going on for generations. So there's been plans set way before I was born to make sure that this side of town is going to prosper, while we just keep all our crud and all of our pretty much trash on this side of town and give these people little to nothing and just pretty much just have them thrive off that. So that's been going on for so long. So, and it's become a norm, especially in Fresno. So we got to break that cycle. And in order to break that cycle, we need a lot more voices and a lot more advocates to pretty much shine a light on the problem and hold people accountable to their to this.
Thank you, Keyshawn. Everyone, thank you for answering that last question. I have a few more before we do open up for the Q&A, and I'd love to get through as many as we can. Let's briefly touch upon what the impact of air pollution is on the human health. I'd love to start off by Keyshawn, since you have been doing lots of research, and then we can make our way to the other panelists. So yes, I would love to understand, the impacts of air pollution on human health and your perspective.
So we already know one of the main factors of living in bad air quality is respiratory issues such as asthma and bronchitis. But through my research and figuring out it goes way in deeper. There's studies that have shown that actually living in bad air quality can affect your actual brain development, and actually kind of can throw you off in schools. And kind of when I read that and understanding, a lot of my friends and a lot of my peers was like really frustrated at school. And it just kind of took that into place. Then there's also living in there. There's also birth rates. When we go into the birth rates for women living in bad air quality and living in these high stress environments on their bodies and also on the baby's body. So having either premature births or just not having stillborns in a whole is also one of the big factors. So, and not a lot of people know this. So also, I really like to take it upon myself to educate my community upon this, because not a lot of people know this. I didn't know it until I figured it out, until I met the people in my space to educate me about these issues. So I just honestly feel like it's really upon myself to educate that. But those is just some of the things I felt was real personal to me.
Thank you, Keyshawn. I'd love to connect with you, offline, because there's so many things we don't realize that are negatively affecting our health, and they're they're man-made issues, anthropogenic issues that we've created. So now we need to find creative solutions. I'd love to get your insight on this, Dr. Lupita. I can repeat the question for you as well. And it is, what is the impact of air pollution on human health?
So, well, that has been the focus of my research for many years. And that is the question that I asked myself when I was Keyshawn's age. When I was actually a little bit older, when I was a young engineer trying to figure out what to do with my scientific training. And that's what led me to public health. Air pollution impacts human health in many ways. It affects the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, just to name a few. He talked about the brain, in fact. So we know that it impacts just about everything in our body. Now, those early impacts go through certain steps. No, that's the part that I get excited because that's like the nitty gritty of all these things. And that's some of the things that I've done, like looking at the actual cellular effects of these things. And of course, for an engineer, it's like a little bit out there. But for me, I need to know where things come from. That's, I think, the true sign of a real engineer. So I need to know what the truth is. And many people are perfectly fine just measuring things. So just to tell you, while I was in public health, I was lucky enough to be at Harvard School of Public Health during the time where they were doing experiments on dogs, where they will expose them to concentrated particles, diesel particles coming from the nearby roads, streets. And I saw firsthand with my own eyes how like the heart rate of the animals changed almost instantly. So that was in the very early 2000s. So to me, as an engineer, I thought, this is big. We need to do something about it. So for me, it's not just understanding this. So then that's when I go back to the engineering. What are we going to do about it? So that's the fixing part. That is the action part that I've been wanting to do. So I made a decision early on, instead of staying in public health, which probably would have been a lot easier to do some of this work, I decided to go back to engineering because I wanted to educate engineers to think about these things before they do more technology that's polluting, before doing products that are going to cause environmental degradation. So to me, it was the prevention piece, doing better science, better engineering. Well, I'm telling you, I face such an opposition, embarrassingly. I could never believe just how backwards that field still is. They don't want to do things better. Still, now we're just invent more tools to measure things. Well, I'm not interested in measuring things. I'm interested in fixing things. So this is where we are now. We got to fix things. And so I'm going to leave it at that because I get excited about this because it's about fixing things. There's no more, let's learn and wait and investigate. No, it's time for action.
I love your solution-oriented attitude about finding the solution, because there is one if you look and you creatively think. Once again, your passion just it's so uplifting. Jessica, I'd love to get your insight on this. And then I have some one-on-one questions for each of you panelists, and then we'll dive back into a few more questions for everyone and then Q&A. So Jessica, I'll let you take the reins.
I feel like I can't even top what Keyshawn and Dr. Montoya just mentioned. They nailed it on the head, just the health impacts and the importance of reducing not only pollution, but again, reducing exposure to the pollution, because at this point, we do need to help mitigate all of those health impacts that were mentioned. So I'll end with that and let you move on, Kirpa. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I'd love to start with a question for you first, and it is, what are some community-based clean air efforts you've worked on in your role at San Joaquin Valley Air District?
Absolutely. So I did mention, and you've heard me mention a bunch because it's really our wheelhouse is to think about things on a regional level. Air pollution doesn't necessarily, that doesn't work in a box and in a perfect environment. It is regional, of course. But we do, as I mentioned, work on what's called Assembly Bill, or AB 617. It's a community-based effort that is a California Assembly Bill and a statewide effort where the state actually selects communities in different air districts across California to be a part of this focused effort to reduce emissions and reduce exposure to these overburdened populations. And so the first year of this bill, they selected 10 communities. 2 of those were in the Valley. 1 is South Central Fresno, which includes Southwest Fresno that we've been talking about. The other is Shafter. The second round of selection, we added South Stockton. And the most recent round of selection last year, we added Arvin Lamont, which is in Southeast Kern County. And so in each of these, we work with community steering committee members. So these are residents and community advocates and scientists and business folks and agencies who are involved in land use, as we mentioned earlier, but also involved in other sort of planning things, all sit on a steering committee where we meet with them in the evenings with Spanish translation and ASL interpretation to come together and find these solutions that Dr. Montoya talked about. So our role is really to take what has globally more been done on an agency level from a top down, hey, this is how we're going to clean the air, and really make it more ground up. The community members are involved in crafting clean air solutions. We have been working on a lot of sort of what I would call just focusing efforts on more typical air quality solutions, but we've also been working on innovative solutions. So to Dr. Montoya's point, we've been working on finding how do we work to find the cleanest technologies or to get people into the cleanest technologies, get dirty diesel trucks, for example, off the road. So that's our main goal. Our other main goal is to work to deploy sort of more concentrated networks of community air monitors. And so the community tells us, essentially, works with us to look at kind of the science of what we as an air district can inform them, but they can also inform us what their community needs are. And they've helped us derive a sense of where we want to place really high level types of air monitoring. And so kind of to supplement the work that Keyshawn's been doing with air quality sensors, which are sort of like low cost, very accessible to folks, we have really like regulatory grade sensors that we've placed with and made accessible to community members to see real time, more than just PM, lots of different air pollutants and toxics. So that's the work we're doing. We're really kind of in various stages in different communities, but definitely excited to continue the work and definitely interested in connecting with all of you. There are so many measures and opportunities in each of these communities that really lend themselves to networking with folks like you that are involved in clean tech. So definitely that's a great opportunity.
Thank you so much for answering the question, and I'm very excited to connect offline as well. The next question I'll be directing is towards Keyshawn. How do we make climate advocacy and taking part in climate science more accessible to all demographics?
Well, first off, I think we got to start at the schools. And I'm talking about a very young age, starting at elementary, because advocacy is, the spark can start as soon as you can really start understanding what's going on in your world. So you can really don't limit youth to when they can really start learning about advocacy. So I honestly feel like putting it in our school is the first step into making it a broad thing, because schools is really diverse. So I honestly feel like that would be one of the biggest forefront. Then actually when they start getting actually involved into the community. So just like organizations like Fresno Boys and Women of Color, they didn't start off doing this, but one of the students was actually, one of the students / members was suggesting that we should actually start transferring this into the schools. So what they did was they actually partnered with Fresno Unified, and it was only Fresno Boys and Men of Color that did this. So I would say it was kind of an experiment, but they partnered with Fresno Unified, and they started going to all the schools, I think on Fridays and Wednesdays. Pretty much what we do at the meetings, the regular meetings we'll do outside of school, is they did inside of school, and that actually brought in a lot more members than just having it outside of school and pretty much being a word of mouth group. So putting it in schools would just pretty much allow a bigger space to be there. And I feel like it's more fair to the community because everybody goes to school, I would think. And if you're taking the time to go to school, why not learn about something in your community while you're there? I just feel like it'll be appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you for your insight. I agree with you. I think it is that spark can come off at any point in time, and connecting with kids when they're younger, I think they're so curious at that age I was. So I appreciate your insight and your perspective. Dr. Lupita Montoya, I have an open-ended question for you. So remember, just very, very short. It's more so of like, how and why is climate change an environmental justice issue? And I'd love for you to touch upon your research, especially with the research that you did at the environmental health at the State University of New York and Harvard School of Public Health.
Yes. So I mentioned I'm an engineer by training, started as a mechanical engineer thinking I was going to design clean cars. And then I ended up with a PhD in environmental engineering and air quality, specifically studying biological contaminants like bioaerosols, which COVID is one of them. So it was like prime for what's happening right now. So for me, climate change is just one of many problems we're going to be facing. And as far as I can tell, what I did, and when I was a SUNY, for short, State University of New York, was looking at asthma in the Mohawk Nation. And it is a problem that continues and it's become more aggravated. It happens in many other communities of color. And literally, that's how my PhD advisor recruited me out of mechanical engineering to environmental engineering, because it was a problem that affected people of color. And that ultimately was the real pull for me. Just wanted to do technical work. I'm an engineer. I want to do engineering. I want to do science, but I want to help people. So that was kind of like the goal. When I was at Harvard, I talked about working on methods. After what I did at SUNY, it was most of the people learning with communities of color, how difficult that work is. And then at Harvard, it was more of the technology and the methods. So I learned about toxicology. I got to use my mechanical engineering. I had to do really good stuff. I was in heaven when I was dealing with gadgets that were going to help people. And, but I did not want to stay in public health because I want to be an engineer doing these gadgets and helping people. So the climate change to me is the impetus for many things that we see. And so we need to be able to tackle this big problem from many perspectives. So if we don't bring more people to the table to solve this problem, we're going to come out with the same failed solutions that we keep dealing with for a long time. So that's what diversity buys us, something that many people do not want to buy. That's what I learned in academia. Some people do not want people of color to live better lives. They don't want us educated. They don't want us empowered. And they certainly don't want us to speak up. So that's where I am right now. I'm doing all of these things because I see what's going on there. Now, I think there are more people interested in changing things. Climate change is something that is going to bring many people together, because we cannot be solving problems in the same failed ways that we always have. So I think the impetus is big enough that we'll finally, hopefully, be more open-minded.
Thank you so much. The work that each one of you guys are doing in this space is so impactful, and it's so useful to hear it from experts like yourself at different stages. We are at the Q&A time. I've got a ton of questions, but I'm sure the ones that our audience have submitted are even better. So I will dive into some of the questions that we have. One of the questions which was submitted was, what is something people at this event can do to help reduce air pollution and support people who are suffering from the effects? Who would like to go?
I can, yeah, go ahead. All of you have something.
I want to hear you, and then I can add something that hasn't been mentioned.
Cool. So Jessica or Keyshawn, who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Keyshawn.
Can you restate the question? I'm sorry.
The question is what is something people at this event can do to help reduce air pollution and support people who are suffering from the effects?
Support people. I could just say personally, just get involved. Show up. In order to show up, you have to figure out what spaces is actually dealing with these problems, and then just from there, just create network, figure out who the partners you can figure out what can you do in these spaces. But biggest thing I can just say in that is just really just get involved.
Thank you. Jessica, can
piggybacking off of that, knowing that we have kind of a diverse group of people, obviously we are an agency that covers the Central Valley. There are similar agencies, South Coast Air Quality Management District and Bay Area AQMD, so same thing, Air Quality Management District. Get involved and work with them, especially I know there are a lot of folks on this call that are represent businesses and you are all working in clean tech. So I think looking for opportunities on our end to push forward some of these innovative like technical solutions that have been discussed today. We do have funding, and I know all of these groups have funding to help support those projects and get you all the funding you need to maybe come up with these technical solutions. But as mentioned, in the meantime, how do we get people to know about this and to protect themselves is to connect them to the resources, whether it's Purple Air and you just need people to say, hey, here's a map, your air pollution is poor today, here you go. Or connect them. We have an app in the Valley, the Bay Area, and South Coast have maps, or apps rather, where you can look and see, how do I protect myself? How do I make sure my school, where my kids go, know to keep kids inside when air pollution is bad? So again, it's a mixture of finding innovative solutions and then informing and making sure folks that you know are being impacted are informed. Maybe they don't know to not go run outside when there's a wildfire. You'd be surprised how many people I saw running in 2020 and in 2018 when we had those historic wildfires, and they're breathing like this insane amount of smoke. So just really connecting people, to Keyshawn's point, networking and connecting and learning.
Thank you. Dr. Lupita, can we hear you chime in?
Well, you know, I changed careers. So I moved to the nonprofit, and now I am looking to what is happening or not happening with our community. So I am now in the San Diego region and working very closely now with the air quality, or air pollution control district, attending meetings. In fact, I will be attending later today a meeting for CARB at the state level to support the nomination of the nomination of the border community as one of the environmental justice communities under Assembly Bill 617, which Jessica mentioned. So I will be speaking in favor of, obviously, they will be part of the San Diego region. And so I'm so looking forward to helping in that. And then also with regards to, what we need to do on the other end, all of us who are here, have an interest in science and in tech. Obviously, that's why we're in this circle. And so the idea here is that there are companies that have power, they have resources, and we need to encourage them to invest in the solutions that we need, because ultimately it is good business to have clean air. And I can assure you that if our most susceptible and poor communities are protected, everyone, including our business, will be protected. And we really need to look at with that lens. We need to not think about us and then them, who cares about them? Well, climate change is, as you know, it's a global problem. So even if you have the resources, but everybody else is not being educated or given the right protections, we all pay the price. You don't need to go farther than this pandemic. All of us are sequestered in our homes. And it is in large part because of the unevenness of our society. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I'd actually like to piggyback off of what you just said. We had a question that was submitted by Elena Adams, and she wanted to ask you, lovely panelists, what local companies can do to help communities or low-income neighborhoods to address air quality issues?
Meet with them. Meet with your local communities, meet with the residents that you work and do your operations next to. Oftentimes, I mean, certainly, of course, we understand there's science behind air pollution and how it forms and how it impacts, but oftentimes too, some of these community members' concerns we're finding in actually meeting with people, right, one-on-one is, hey, I'm just concerned about the truck driving down my street. Can we meet and talk about, can that truck just go around to, not drive down where the kids are? Yes, of course, there's traffic concerns, but it's also, I don't want that blowing diesel pollution. And, just meeting and understanding those concerns is like base level. And if you don't know how to meet with those, again, there are these, in certain communities, these 617 efforts going on where we have that space. But also beyond 617, there are always opportunities to meet with your local advocates and your residents. I think that's like base level number one, I would suggest.
Thank you. Anyone else like to chime in on that? Keyshawn, Dr. Lupita?
I went to specific after LaShawn. I want to hear you first.
Can you say the question again?
Absolutely. The question was what local companies can do to help communities or low-income neighborhoods to address air quality issues.
To address. I would say pretty much by investing. Again, what Jessica said, taking time to really go in these communities and seeing what the problem is, because you don't know till you know. And I'm not saying just throw money at the problem, because that's not, you need an actual solution plan and goal and set for this to actually see out and have actual everlasting effects on the community. So with that, you need to actually sit down, create a plan, and invest and hear the youth will have the biggest perspective on what needs to be fixed, because they're out and about every day seeing it firsthand. So they're the first perspective you should want to get in terms of these companies going into these communities and wanting to help.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. You know, the youth are the holders of the future. So thank you for your input. Dr. Lupita, can I have you chime in?
Yeah, so on that note, so our youth must be educated. And my preference, well, not preference, but, recommendations that we need to promote sciences and engineering among our young people. I tell you, once you get enlightened, there's no way they can put you back in the darkness. That's my message. You can't go back into not knowing. So young people need to be educated into the fields where they will be able to understand the repercussions of all the things that are around them. And instead of being, this stressed about it, because it's one of my concerns about younger generations, that these problems are big, like climate change, that some people feel, almost too much burden on them. And I don't think it's fair to put that burden on young people. We need to be there as advocates, supporters, and loving people, because they're the ones who are inheriting this mess. That's why I'm still engaged, and that's why my energy keeps growing up, because it's not so much for me as much as my children and the children of my children, should they have any, because younger people are now not even wanting to have children because they don't want to face things like climate change and what's coming out there. So I think we need to think with compassion, with love, and with our science, which is, some people can't put it together. I can. So it is about being, proactive, but also compassionate and loving, so that we can do what needs to be done scientifically, but for the right reasons. So investing in allowing people, because so many times it's stopping you from getting educated. So all of us need to be here thinking, we need to enable the next generation to have the tools to protect themselves. And do the right thing. It's that simple.
I agree. Once again, your passion, everyone's passion here cannot be matched about this topic. I do have a few questions I would love to get from the lovely audience, which are a little bit more focused. From one of our volunteers itself, Alua Kemi, she would like to know, how can a continent like Africa start or do the initial steps for implementing policies to curb air pollution? That's in an area that's sort of known as like a laid back area that's not really bothered with the issue yet. Who would like to go?
That's a huge, yeah, I don't know. That's a huge list. The policies, I think the advocacy back in the 70s is really what got the Clean Air Act in place here. And it really took a lot of advocacy, from my understanding, like historically. And actually really started with California first, before it became a federal requirement. So I mean, that's from my understanding of how it started here. That's a great question. I don't know if other panelists have thoughts on that.
So I feel like one is figuring out how is the government set up in terms of their outlook on clean air. solutions. That would be the first one, to see if they're really with it or against it. And once you figure out your lane in the fight, and with that, it's going to be easier to see if they're pretty much an opponent or an ally. And if they're allies, just pretty much just put a plan in place. They're more than willing to help you. Just probably need a plan to help actually get into the community. Like I said, it's, on the outside looking in, it's kind of hard to know what the problem is until you know. Now, if they're an opponent, that's when you kind of got to get involved with advocacy groups, organizations that's pushing for clean air and pushing for environmental justice, and then just make them change. So, but first things first, figuring out where's the fight.
Thank you for that. Dr. Lupita?
Yes, so one project I did in Africa that I haven't worked on a whole lot of it was looking at the dual problem of waste management and air pollution, or actually energy poverty. So if you look at my publication, you find one study I did where we were trying to solve these two problems at once. And of course, that one project didn't go very far because who cares about what happens in Africa? That's what I found time and time again, every time I work with problems that affected poor people, whether it was here or in South America or in Africa. There hasn't been invested. Or maybe there was no investing if the researcher is the brown woman in the room, the one and only. So that's the realization I came to. So what happens in places like Africa? We have had people going into those places trying to help, deal with the problems there, including air pollution, or creating solutions that oftentimes come out of the heads of people who have absolutely no understanding of the local, realities of the community. So that's why for me it's so important that we educate people locally, that we give them the space and we give them the opportunities and resources to solve the problems. I do not need somebody who knows less than me, who does not know my culture, don't know my community, don't know my language, to come and tell me how I'm going to solve the problems in my community, which is basically what I see all the time. We need to do this for all over the world. We need to enable people. So one of the discussions is about decolonizing science and technology, because we have people providing solutions that literally are ill-equipped to deal with the realities of local communities, whether it's in the US or outside. And so that's part of the big, and a big capital letters, big problem that we've been dealing with. And so we need to change that. We need to change that. We have to accept that sometimes technology will not resolve everything. And sometimes we have to accept that the powerful and the only one who's ever been allowed to do anything is not the right person to do the problem solving now.
Yes,
that's my attitude now.
Thank you. All of your input has been very, very helpful. And please, people who are listening and chiming in, feel free to reach out to our panelists. They're a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure that they'd love to continue these conversations. I think we have about time for maybe one or two more questions. And I did want to see if we could fit in about one more question from our audience. And this is from Tessa. She's asking, can you explain the data discrepancy that we see sometimes between Pure Air and airnow.gov? For example, Pure Air may show red, but AirNow will show the air quality is yellow. Which source should we go to?
I can chime in, as it's a question we get constantly. And just to add to the confusion, we also, you heard me mention, we have an app, and sometimes those are slightly different. And it's been growing, you probably noticed it a lot recently, maybe in the past 2 years, and that's with the growth of Purple Air and with the integration of more of these sort of citizen-based sensors into these kind of aggregate apps. If you have an iPhone, sometimes it's already on your weather app, so it's even more confusing. Primarily, we essentially point people to a handful of resources and say to take action at the one that's sort of showing the highest. And that's not because any one of them, they're all equal. It's the sense that some of them are pulling in different information, or maybe information that's closer to where you live. So just to kind of explain quickly, Purple Air are only going to be those low-cost sensors. They can't be calibrated. They tend to, and we've done a lot of research, and across the board people have done research, they tend to, in instances of higher air pollution, read like 10-fold higher than what we're seeing on regulatory monitors if they're literally next to each other. But Does that mean it's maybe really conservative and you should be taking action? Sure, that's great. So Purple Air is a great resource for some. I would say airnow.gov is probably of the two, the more accurate in the sense that it takes in addition to the Purple Air sensors, so the citizen science sensors, all of the regulatory information from the state, from your local regulatory agency at your local air district, as well as some of those community monitors I mentioned that are, again, calibrated, scientifically sound, used to comply with the Clean Air Act. But I don't want to turn people away. If you are, whatever you are comfortable in looking at and makes more sense to you as a resident or to your folks or your family as a resident, that is what you should be using. And that's what we generally tell people.
Thank you.
So if I may chime in a little bit of this, because this is where I can use my didactic tools. So, you know, I've been a professor for a long time, and I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer. So I like gadgets. And I can tell you some of these local sensors are not necessarily, you know, very accurate. So as an engineer, I always question, are they operated properly? Have they been properly calibrated? I mean, I've done experiments not too long ago where I had to calibrate the instruments, which are much more accepted than the purple airs, for example. In fact, we decided not to use purple airs in our studies of the Navajo Nation. And I have to calibrate the instruments that are much more accepted for the specific pollutants that I was working with, specifically, you know, a mixture of wood and coal in the homes. So that's the kind of work that I do, because I know the technology is limited. And so having the technical understanding that I need to account for these errors, that's the first step. So when you're a young investigator like LaShawn, you may not know these things. So you do the best you can with the technology you have. So that's why we need to all come together, because some of these technologies are accessible, but not necessarily accurate. But you do have networks that are much more accurate that you need to rely again upon to get better, better answers. The other question is, you know, a lot of these maps that we get are based on methodologies, models that are done. They're all mathematical models. What does that mean? You input information in there and then mathematics spews out what is expected to happen. Some of them are better than others. And it all depends on what information goes in it and how well, you know, the technology you're using, including the computers or supercomputers that are used to run these things. So we need to understand that technology has limitations. And so we need to know, at least at some basic level, the science that goes behind these things so that we can give it the proper weight. But need to continue to push for these tools to to be improved and to become more public and user-friendly, so that more people are comfortable using and also telling us when they don't work properly. So that's the kind of thing where I get excited, because, you know, I got to dig into some of these stuff. Oh, you know, if it was my student, I would have told him to do this all the way. Or I can see how they made a mistake. Those are the kinds of things when I have fun, because then I can use some of this other training to catch things that other people won't catch, and hopefully use that to make recommendations to improve things. So that's my take on it.
Thank you. This discussion amongst you thought leaders have been such a pleasure. I know that we're running close to ending this event, and I just want to say thank you so much. From the WCS community, this event means so much to us. So panelists, if you'd like to just drop your information so the audience can connect with you afterwards. I am very grateful for my amazing team of volunteers, Cassie Snow, Caroline Trowbridge, Kim Tercera, and Olua Kemi. Thank you so much for joining us today for this lively panelist discussion on air pollution. I hope this inspired you to think about the intersectionality of environmental issues. And if you have any questions or interest in volunteering with WCS, feel free to reach out to me. Once again, we would love to have your feedback on how this event went, and we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much to the presenters.
Thank you.
All of our participants.
All the participants, all the panelists, and we will be giving anyone who's registered for the event, you will be getting a recording via email as well. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a lively discussion here today, and I hope we can continue this conversation and be more vocal about the issues that are presented ahead of us. Each of you guys bring such an amazing perspective on this issue, and I can't wait to see what waves you bring about in this industry. Once again, thank you.
I'm so excited for what you guys, young ladies, are doing. And I'm sorry about if ladies is not the right term anymore. I, just know that it comes from my heart. It's ridiculous because as a person of color, I've been called Chicana, Latina, Mexican American, Latinx, you name it, minority, underrepresented, marginalized. It's just a whole bunch of labels that people throw at me. So I'm Lupita. And when I need to be, I'm Dr. Montoya. So it's all me and I'm comfortable. And I think that labels is what just derail people too much. We need to go beyond that. I told people, I'm done with the labels discussion. I was done on my freshman year in college. Not enough of that. So let's get to the heavy work. And I'm really, really looking forward, Jessica, because if you're a modeler, perfect, because I'm an experimentalist, but I'm a math person, so I need to know what's going on behind this. And I'm also a people's person. I'm here back in California to make things happen. And I had enough of, wasting people's time, especially poor people's time and health and lives. So if you guys are game, I encourage you, your group, to think about actions that we can do to get women involved, and change, real change. And we can. We say it in Espanol, we said, sí se puede. Yes, we can.
Yes, I love it.
Yes.
I want to thank you all, and attendees who are still here, thank you for staying on. Thank you to our lovely volunteers. I will personally be reaching out to this group of panelists afterwards. Would love to stay in touch and get your feedback on this event. But thank you, each one of you, for your passion. It's, at the end of the day, this is what you dedicate your life to, and it's great to see that your work is transpiring and inspiring other people to want to do this great work. It's selfless, you're wanting to leave an impact on your community, and beyond that.